no parent, whether they're neurodiverse or not, is going to be 100% consistent.
Are you overwhelmed by motherhood and barely keeping your head above water? Are you confused and frustrated by how all the other moms make it look so easy? You can't figure out how to manage the chaos in your mind, your home, or your family. I get you, mama. Parenting with ADHD is hard. Here is your permission slip to let go of the Pinterest-worthy visions of organization and structure fit for everyone else. Let's do life like our brains do life, creatively, lovingly, and with all our might. When we embrace who we are and how our brains work, we can figure out how to live our lives successfully and, in turn, lead our families well. At the end of the day, we just want to be good moms. But, spoiler alert, you are already a great mom. ADHD does not mean you're doomed to be a hot mess, mama. You can rewrite your story from shame spiral to success story. And I'll be right here beside you to cheer you on. Welcome to Motherhood in ADHD. Hey there, Successful Mama. It's your friend, Patricia Sung. How recently has it been where your kid was getting irritated, then you got irritated, and then your kid got more irritated, and then you got more irritated, and then everybody was irritated, and it all went off the rails? This is part of our emotional regulation, and today we're talking about it with Dr. Carrie Jackson. Now, Dr. Carrie is a child psychologist and a parent coach in Southern California who specializes in working with parents of kids who have ADHD. As someone who has ADHD herself, she helps parents with novel strategies that fit with their and their kids' neurodiverse brains. Now, if you are in Southern California, or I guess anywhere in California, Dr. Carrie also does diagnosis for ADHD, so she's a great person to have in your Rolodex. And we dive into her diagnosis story and how she became a child psychologist who actually works with parents and not the child. I love finding other people who have a similar take that I do, and like working with mom or dad, like that matters. That is something that is important and valuable and incredibly useful in how we take care of our kids' ADHD as well. We discuss some common themes and issues that she sees in helping ADHD families navigate life with ADHD, as well as you're going to walk away with some specific strategies of what you can do today to help with emotional regulation in your family. So let's welcome Dr. Carrie Jackson to the show. How are you doing this morning?
I am great. Thank you so much for having me. I know it's early in the morning for both of us, so I'm drinking my coffee. Hopefully I will be fully awake and ready to go. So thank you so much for having me on your podcast.
I'm excited. I was like, I'm going to jump right into the tough stuff here of, I have to know, like, how did you get through your doctorate with ADHD?
Oh my goodness. I actually do love this question. It's not one that I get asked that many times, but in college, that was actually when I first started having trouble with keeping up with all the schoolwork, because like, honestly, like throughout high school, it was not as much of an issue because I was just kind of like, I don't need to study for tests and I would just make it through. So like in graduate school, that was where it was really tough for me. You know, it's interesting because like in graduate school, the one I was in, I have my PhD in psychology. It's like way less class focused. So it's like you have your classes, which are important. You have to study for tests and all of those things. But the real main work you do is like seeing clients, doing research. So I feel like that was actually a huge asset to me because it's like I didn't have to spend all of my time studying. And to be honest, it's like I did not put as much effort into my classes because I was more focused on like the real world stuff. So I really focused on that, but I did get actually like a lot of negative feedback on how I don't pay attention in classes. So that was definitely tough for me to hear, but you know, I just focus on all of the applied stuff, and that's why I love what I do now because it's so applied. I don't have to do any classes in those pieces, but it was really tough.
I get this feedback quite often, and I'm always like, ooh, it's a lot to like unravel, but a lot of people will be like, you have these guests on your show that are like so successful and so pulled together and they know all the answers. I'm like, I don't relate with that. Like I'm a mess and I can't get anything done and I can't achieve goals. And like, I can't identify with these successful people on your podcast. Like, can you have somebody who's like a big hot mess on your podcast so I can identify with them? And I'm like, I'm sorry, I gave the impression that I had it all together, but
yes. That is so funny. I get that too, where it's like people, they're like, oh, but you always have it together. And I'm like, do you see what is like going on behind the scenes? Because it's like not that way at all. And I'm sure you did this too, where people are like, you're doing so much, like you're doing so many things. And it's like, yeah, like that's true, because that's like what I have to do to like keep myself like excited about doing things. But like it is not together at all. And I also have a lot of help and support from people who help me keep it together, but it is not that way at all. And so for anyone who does feel that way, like just know that we are both hot messes, like behind the scenes and sometimes like in front of the scenes too.
Yeah, I think we always put like our best foot forward, obviously, but like when something's your passion, like for you helping families with their ADHD, like it's a lot easier to be excited and get things done because you love it. Like that hyper focus kicks in and you like really shine. And I'm like, well, but please don't look at my kitchen counter right now. I am not passionate about that. And it shows.
Mm-hmm. I really appreciate that, because also it's like there's so much that people don't see. And so it's like, of course, we're both like on Instagram and like, you know, all the social media, and you're only seeing like a snippet of our lives. But it's like, I absolutely struggle with a lot of the things that I think like other people do too, where it's like, I constantly feel like I am just like not keeping up with things. Like I'm not doing all the things I should be doing. It's hard. Yeah. So it's like, you know, like you're only seeing like a snippet of what we're doing, and like the hot mess is there too.
But when you think about your ADHD, where do you feel like you really shine and where are the parts that you really struggle with?
So I think that like the parts where it's like I do the best is it's like I do get really into things, like, and I can like really thrive on having like multiple things that I am doing at once, because it's like I need some type of structure, but like I do not like routine at all. And so for me, it's like I am, you know, have my own businesses. And I feel like that is like something that is actually made for me, because I decide what my days look like. I decide what I do versus having somebody else tell me that is like, this is what you're doing today. So it's like I get to choose all of the things that I'm interested in, set my own schedule. So I think that's one of the places where it's like I really feel like I do well in. And I'm sure for you too, you know, it's like you can like do things like according at least somewhat to like what you want to do. But as far as like struggles, and I know we're going to talk about this today, but like I think like emotions are actually like a big place where it's like more of a challenge for me. That, and then like always feeling like I am missing something. So it's like, for example, I just went on a trip this weekend, and before leaving, it was only like a 2-night trip. I feel like I'm leaving something. I feel like I'm leaving something, so stressed out about not keeping up with it. Of course, when I got to the hotel, like I had left like 4 things at home. So it's like, you know, there are always things that I feel like I'm missing. And so like that part I would say is like more stressful, and like I can't always keep up with all of the things. And I also like struggle with emotion regulation too.
Yeah, we're definitely going to get into that today. I'm already
Yes.
like telling myself, I'm like, don't jump in there just yet, Patricia. Ask a few more questions first. But I'm really excited to get into that. Okay. Before I do, when were you actually diagnosed with ADHD and how did you deal with that process?
Not until I was actually an adult, like, which I think is surprising for a lot of people, because it's like, well, I don't know, maybe it's not surprising because like being a girl, you know, like there's that piece too. But yeah, it wasn't actually until I was an adult where I went through an evaluation and then met with a psychiatrist where he was like, yeah, this is going on. Because like I had struggled like at times like throughout my life with just like attention focus. And like even as a child, it's like all the signs were there. But I think I was very lucky to have like a very patient, understanding family. Like my mom is a preschool teacher. So it's like she has the patience of the entire world. But like even like my mom, she always says like from a young age, it's like I would struggle with some things like emotionally and be kind of like all over the place. But it's like I was doing so well in school that it was kind of like there's nothing really going on, is what they thought. They were like, maybe it's just like her personality, or maybe this is just how she is. So you know, throughout like middle and high school, I kind of like skated by, just like did really well in school. But then like underneath it all, I was like still like a lot of struggles with like focusing and attention. And it's like when I got into college is when I was like, okay, this is like really impacting me. But actually, like even as an adult, I felt kind of like, is this something that's going on? Like, you know, like it's hard, I think, to like fully understand without going through like a mental health professional. And I am a mental health professional myself too, but it's like I can't tell what's going on with me. But I don't know. I feel like there was so much stigma around it that it kept me from pursuing it for a while, because I was like, I really do have a lot of things together. So it's like, is it really worth it for me to go? But I am so glad that I did end up going to it, because it's like, now I understand myself better, and now I can like help people, who are similar to me too.
I mean, I know you have kind of this like intersection of parents and kids together that you're working with, but do you see that pattern of folks who are like, well, I'm doing all right so far. So like, is it really worth trying to figure this out?
Yeah, that happens so often. Like, I mean, like, especially even for like the parents that I see, a lot of the times I'm seeing parents for their kids, but the parent, they'll say, the more that I learn from you, or the more that I learn about my child, I'm kind of thinking, this sounds like me, or this sounds like my husband, or this sounds like my partner. And so they'll ask me, they're like, but like, is it really worth it at this point? Because I don't want to have medication, right? And that's completely valid if that is not something you do want to pursue. But it's also like, it can open up like so many different positives, I think, as far as like understanding yourself, and also just like looking at other types of supports for managing your ADHD, like looking at supports from like people like you, for example, where it's like, these are some tips for if you are a mother with ADHD, this is how you can manage it. So I do think it can like bring a huge sense of like relief and understanding for people, because with ADHD, there's often like so much shame behind like different things that you've done throughout your life, where it's like people with ADHD, they tend to internalize them and think that they are like the problem for these behaviors, where really it's related to their ADHD, not their personality, not who they are as a person. And so for you to be able to internalize that, I think is huge.
Yeah, that's exactly what I tell people as well, is like, there's like this piece of validation that we don't realize is so helpful when you have that, because when you don't, it's always like, well, maybe it's just my personality. Maybe I just need to try harder. And it's so much easier to like blame it on yourself and take on that shame when you don't have like this official piece of paper telling you, which you don't need. But for some reason, it seems like so many of us do need that, like, yes, it's true. And then like always the piece of like, ADHD really travels alone. So you probably have some other stuff that you should get checked. And like getting all the pieces of the puzzle together, assuming that you do have someone who is experienced and can, pull those pieces out. But I'm always like, ooh, what do you think? Ooh, what do you think? When, especially for people who work with so many people who have ADHD, like these patterns emerge and you're like, ooh. Okay. So now let me ask you, how did you end up where you are, considering that you went to school for being a child psychologist, but wait, psychologist or psychiatrist?
Psychologist, yeah. So psychologists, okay. It's actually very confusing, because there are some states where you can prescribe medication as a psychologist, but overall, like most psychologists do not prescribe medication. There are just a few that you can. And psychiatrist is a medical doctor, went to medical school for medication. So yeah.
Okay. Thank you. I just said that. And I was like, did I just make that up? Okay. So you went to school for child psychology, but now you mostly work with parents. Like, how did you end up with the flip flop? Like, I don't find many people who actually focus on the parents instead of the kids. So I'm like, ooh, how'd you get there? What happened? Tell the story.
My experience in graduate school actually like led me there. So in graduate school, which I went to West Virginia University in small town Morgantown, West Virginia, it is like a program where I started working with a professor who she focused really on parenting. So there is actually like so much research showing how like when you support parents, that can lead to so many positive mental health changes for kids, aside from just ADHD. So like anxiety, depression, oppositionality, like even just like other like concerns, or just like kids who are like trying to develop like their social and emotional thinking. It's really helpful to focus on the parents. And so with her, we were doing a lot of research really focused on like, how does focusing on parenting actually prevent problems like for people later down the road. And so like when you focus on supporting parents with parenting interventions, that's how you can really prevent any of these challenges, not any of them, but like many of them down the road. So I started doing like a lot of work as far as like learning different parenting programs, because there are interventions out there specifically for the parents to help the kids, which trained in those. And it's amazing because you can actually see a lot of change really fast when you work with parents. And so it led me to that, which is like, I love doing this, want to continue working with parents. And so now here I am doing like most of that as my work. I do see some kids, but like I really do love like working with the parents as well too, because they're kind of like, they're a missing piece, I think, in a lot of support networks where kids are getting it, but the parents aren't getting it.
Like for me, I was a middle school teacher before I started doing this. And I feel like that it is the missing piece there because we can give all these tools to families, but ultimately the parents are responsible for actually executing everything. And when you have a kid with ADHD, there's a fairly good chance one of the parents does as well. So now you're expecting somebody who is also kind of a hot mess to now do like all their basic parenting stuff. But now let's add on another layer of your kid needs something extra. And it's a lot for like regular parenting is already like a lot of effort, but then you throw on like now your kid needs more. And it's just a lot for parents to carry. And when we don't focus on them and we don't give them the tools and strategies and support, it's so much harder for all of those things to like stay in place. When you look like at your parent population, like, would you be able to guess like how many of the parents that you work with would be neurodiverse and how many would not?
It's the majority, absolutely, that is neurodiverse. I would say at this point, it's like rare that I have a parent where they're not. And if they aren't, many of them are actually like undergoing the process to understand if they are neurodiverse. So it is very, very uncommon, I feel like, to have a parent where they're neurotypical and their child is neurodiverse. That being said, it does happen still, you know, absolutely. There are ways that that can happen, but largely like ADHD is a genetic disorder. And so oftentimes you do see it run in families, and that can bring, of course, so many different, I think, strengths and also challenges. It's like you might be able to understand your child, and at the same time, it's like now you've got double to manage, double to overcome, which is really tough.
How do you differentiate your strategies that you're teaching parents to fit their neurodiversity?
I love that question because, like, I think a lot of parents who are neurodiverse, like, when they come to me, they're worried. They're like, listen, I've tried so many things. I've tried all the routines, all the reward charts. They just don't work for me.
Okay, sorry, I'm just interrupting you. I hate sticker charts and reward charts so much. Thank you for saying that.
Yeah. And I mean, there may be ways to incorporate some of these strategies, but it's like, I know who I work with. It's not going to be something they're going to stick to. So like, let's find another way to do it. With that being said, it's like, I look for like not 100% consistency, knowing from the get-go that is not going to be possible. No parent, whether they're neurodiverse or not, is going to be 100% consistent, right? Also, a lot of the times with parents who have ADHD, one of the things they'll do is like, I feel like they will almost feel like hyper focused on like parenting at times, where it's like they will really focus on like, I'm going to be the best ADHD parent. Let's do all the routines, reward charts, all of this. And I'm like, okay, let's actually dial it back, like, because that is a lot to do. Realistically, I don't know if you will be able to keep up with that. So I really focus on like skills in the moment, where it's like we're taking away some of the things that you're doing and making it more sustainable, and also like giving parents the space to like accept the fact that you can still be a great parent, even if you're not 100% consistent, even if you're not a Pinterest mom doing all of those activities like that are amazing, but you don't have to do that to be a good parent. So it's really about dialing it back, helping you feel that you are still like a great parent. It just takes managing the strategies and like tweaking them a little bit for your brain and your family.
Where do you see the most frequent obstacles popping up? Or like, what are the most common themes that you see with your clients?
Oh man. Okay. So that is tough. I would say so, like, there are a lot of challenges as far as like parents implementing things at home in a way where it's like they can be consistent with them. So like I think that is like just throughout just like a strategy, or like it's a challenge that parents have where they're like, maybe we're going to try like a new way of communicating with their kids. And so it's like they'll be like, I forgot to do that this week, you know, like because they have ADHD. But so what I do with parents is I really focus on like, let's identify a time that you can actually practice this skill. Maybe it's going to be the 5 minutes before bedtime. Maybe it's going to be during dinner time. So that is like one of the pieces where we really like start with like dialing it back down. I mean, I see a lot of parents though who are also struggling with like emotion regulation from both their kids and themselves, because it's like their kids will be become emotionally dysregulated. And then like as a parent, they're oftentimes like triggered basically by their child's own emotional dysregulation for various reasons. So it may just be that like their child is having a tantrum and that's like really loud and difficult for them. Or it may be the reason that their child is having a tantrum that like might trigger their own parent's emotion dysregulation. And so that kind of becomes a tough thing to manage when it's like you have a parent with ADHD who is emotionally dysregulated and a child with ADHD who's emotionally dysregulated. So it's like a cycle that is hard to break.
When we enter that like spiral or like the late, like it's almost like a laddering of like kids dysregulated, parent gets dysregulated. Then I would say, you can't see me on the podcast. I was like, and in my hands, they're like, it's like one side goes up and then the other side goes up and one side goes up. And it's like, it's almost like a one-upping of dysregulation. And then it all, falls off the wagon. Usually when that's happening, like most of my clients don't realize that they're even in that like stress mode and like that they've hit that cycle and it's like the spin cycle's on and we're going until it's too late. So how do we like back up the truck and how do we notice that we have the problem in the first place? And then my second question is going to be, okay, then what do we do about it? But let me start with like, how do we even notice that like everything is falling off the rails?
Oh my gosh. Well, it can be like a very quick escalation, which I think is the reason why a lot of the times people don't realize that it's going off the rails. So like one of the things that like I will work with parents on is like really identifying the first signs of both their child's emotion dysregulation and theirs, because like big emotions, they're really like a wave a lot of the times where it's like they go up, and if you could see me, I am like making my hand go up into a peak, and then they peak like a wave and then they go back down. So I will have parents identify like the very first signs that their child is getting emotionally dysregulated. And that can often help because a lot of the times parents are not as aware of their own first signs of emotional dysregulation, but they can tell their child's. So if they're seeing that their child is like starting to like get short with them, some parents, they've told me that like the first signs is like a lot of like moving their bodies around in like kind of a dysregulated way where it's not a tantrum, but it's like their child just like starts to like move their body a lot and have a lot of energy. They feel keyed up. Those signs are so important to pay attention to. And like when you can like notice those outside of those situations, then you can actually sometimes do something about them. Again, you're never going to always be able to de-escalate the situation, but it's a helpful place to start at least with de-escalating it.
Okay. When you think about the patterns, do most people have like a pretty predictable pattern where it's pretty easy to pick that out? Like most people with ADHD don't have a really good sense of themselves, and we don't like listen to ourselves very well. We don't hear our body. So like a lot of times it's hard for us to pick those out. Is it something that's usually easy to find? Or is it like, oh, well, sometimes I do this, but sometimes I do that. And sometimes I do this. Like how predictable is it for us to find those first signals?
So I would say that like there are going to be like many signals, but many of them will likely be the same. And so it's not necessarily that every single time you do the same thing, but you might start to notice like patterns within that pattern. And especially working with someone, like that is something that I help people do, is really identify the patterns, because I oftentimes have parents or kids say like, it's so random when I get upset and I really can't tell the signs. And I agree, it can seem random until you really break it down. So like, for example, like I might have a family where they say, my child forgot to turn in an assignment and it just like set me off, or we were going to this birthday party and it set me off. So I start to look at like the broad patterns where it's like, okay, it seems like a lot of these triggers, they're really in like social situations. That is the broader pattern. Or it might be like when a limit is set. And then also like what that looks like for you is it's like, okay, the first thing that you start to notice is your physiological, like your body symptoms. Okay. For some people, what they notice first is like their thoughts and what's going on there. So it's really about breaking it down into like the broader classes of patterns. But I think that's really hard to do by yourself. And so working with someone can be a great way to do that.
I'm like, oh, we do that too.
Yay.
like you said, because we don't have as much self-awareness, and like, I'm going to try not to get on my soapbox about why that is and all the patterning we received as kids to ignore ourselves, but I'm going to rein it in, Patricia, is that because we don't have as high of an awareness of ourselves, a lot of times we don't even realize that like we have that pit in our stomach, or like our face is starting to turn red, or we're starting to feel hot. Like a lot of us don't have that like body awareness. So to like zoom out and look at those bigger patterns of like social situations. When I tell my kid no, like for some people, it's like when I forgot something, anytime I've forgotten something and I start getting mad at myself, like when you start to zoom out and look at like the big pattern, then it feels like then it's easier for us to like zoom in and start to see the smaller patterns. So
yeah. Because it is like
true.
zooming out and zooming in. I think a lot of clients, they get surprised by how like specific I get about the situations that happen, where it's like, okay, let's talk about that time this past weekend where you were upset. So like, tell me exactly what happened. And like, we go slow through these instances, but it's so important because that is where that awareness can be built too.
Yeah. Cause in the moment, like when you're mad, and bull in a china shop just blaze on through and we don't notice all the little things that go on because we've already hit volcano mode. There's lava everywhere, people. Mama, are you looking for some extra support? Could you use a few more like-minded mamas in your circle? Here is your official invitation to join our Facebook group, the Motherhood and ADHD Community. Here you can ask questions, share advice, but most importantly, know that you're not alone. Click on the link in the show notes or search on Facebook for Motherhood and ADHD Community. So come join our little corner of the internet with other mamas who know how your brain works and won't look at you crazy when you share what's floating around inside there. Instead, they'll say, I get it. I've been there and I know how that is. So come on, what are you waiting for? See you in there. Again, that's the Motherhood and ADHD Community on Facebook. Okay, so now that we know step one is looking at those signals and that it is helpful to have someone walk through it with us, because when we're that stressed out, we can't a lot of times see that. And it's like, that's your body protecting you. It's okay. Like it's not a bad thing, but having someone there to help you is very useful. Once we can identify what some of these patterns are. So we've got like the recognition of like, oh, things are starting to fall off the rails. We can see it happening. What do we do in that moment when like, oh, no, now I realize it's all going off the rails, panic. Like, what can we actually do to like stop the epic meltdown on all parties? Because I want moms to be able to walk away from this episode having like a tangible thing of like, I can do this. I can look for patterns. Mm-hmm. And two, when I realize everything's going to hell in a handbasket right now, what's one thing they can do to hopefully, which again, it's not going to work every time. We're not saying that's standard for ourselves, but like, what's something we could do some of the times to keep it from turning into epic meltdown from everybody?
Yes. So of course, like you said, like it's not going to happen every time, but like after you've identified the patterns, like there are going to be different ways to manage what's going on. And I'm all for prevention, but let's say you are like off the rails and you're like, okay, how do I rein it back in? If you are like in an argument with your child and you've noticed, okay, this is escalating. Honestly, one of the biggest ways to de-escalate it is to start by like lowering your voice into almost a whisper. Like when you are speaking to your child, because it's like, if you are raising your voice, your child is going to try and raise their voice too, where you get into that one-up situation where like you were talking about. But like, if you just lower your own voice first, that will regulate your own emotions as well too, because you're not continuing to yell. Your child, they will likely also have to like calm themselves down so they can actually hear what you're saying. So that's like a pretty quick strategy that you can use. The only thing I will say is it's hard to do that when you're dysregulated at first, but like when you do it and you see some success with it, it can be really beneficial to try that out.
And then how do we help our kids? Like, even if we somehow have mastered this skill ourselves, how do we help our kids when they are in that dysregulated state? Like, what's something we can do in that moment to help them? Because like, it feels like usually people are like, just calm down, calm down. It's like, no one ever calmed down by telling like someone telling them to calm down.
It does the opposite, right?
Yes. Like, what can we actually do for our kids? Like when we see that they're starting to lose it and we ourselves have not yet lost it, what can we do to help them in that moment?
So I will say that like, actually, like the more you try and do in that situation, like the more escalated it can become actually. And so as a parent, like one of the most helpful things you can do is actually give your child space to regulate their emotions themselves, because so many parents, what their instinct is to jump in, problem solve, like when their child is starting to show those signs of dysregulation, or if they are having that dysregulation. And the issue with that is it's like kids, they do learn to regulate their emotions through parents, which is great, but we also want them to learn to do it themselves. And so like as a parent, if you're always like trying to calm them down in the moment, they aren't learning those self-regulation skills. So if they are like having a meltdown in the moment, or if they're even like on the way to there, you can ask them like questions, be like, hey, it sounds like, like you're frustrated because you lost your video game. What do you think we can do? So that helps them like solve problems themselves and start to regulate their own emotions themselves too, which is really important for helping kids really become like emotionally regulated adults too. Just as we're talking too, I'm realizing like as you're asking me questions, oh my gosh, it's so funny doing like podcasts like as someone with ADHD with another person with ADHD, because like I feel like I will start like answering your question and then at the end I'm just like, what did she even ask me? Like, how did I get here? I'm like, I hope I answered that.
I just follow the rabbit trail. No,
Yeah.
You did. It's like, I want the mom listening to have a very tangible thing to do in those moments. And in this case, the tangible thing is that when you have not lost your cool, but your kid is struggling, our job is not to like regulate for them. Like, I think a lot of times we hear like sharing your regulation and we think that means like forcibly putting our regulation on them. And that's not what it is. It's sharing, not shoving. So how do we teach them those skills without like smothering them or walking away? Like, it just feels like in the moment as a mom, like I'm torn between like, I want to help you, but I don't want to do it for you. And I want to teach you how to do it, but I want you to be able to do it on your own. But also I don't want to walk away from you because then I heard that's also bad if I just leave you to figure it out yourself and I don't help. And it's like, you just have all these different, like you're weighing all the pros and cons of all different strategies at the same time. And you don't know what to pick in the moment.
Yeah. Very true. So like, I mean, I actually don't know if you have multiple kids or like if you have like just, you have two. So, okay. So like, I'm guessing like there are times that your kids fight unless they are 100% perfect. So like with siblings, for example, like let's say that like you're in your living room, you hear a fight going on. It's helpful for kids to learn how to solve some conflict themselves. And so it's like, I encourage parents to just kind of like let it sit for a while, see if they come to like some type of like conflict resolution. But then like to use a strategy of teaching kids self-regulation, what you might want to do is like ask them some of those questions I was talking about to help them problem solve. So like, let's say they're both fighting over a toy that they both want to play with. What you could do is like, like you've given them like a few minutes to sort it out. They're not sorting it out. So you could say, it looks like you guys are having a problem where you're fighting over the toy. What are some solutions we could come up with? Have them talk through those solutions together and then offer a lot of praise when they are practicing those problem solving skills. So like rather than like jumping in right when kids start to fight, it's helpful to just sit with it, which again is uncomfortable as a parent. I'm not a parent actually, but I have 4 nephews. And so it's like for me to see some of the fights that they go through at times, I'm like, it is hard to not jump in there, and to just automatically like start to problem solve for them. But it's so important to like sit with it and let them do that.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of fear there too, as like when your kid has ADHD and when you've seen them go down a path that's not good, like where they've gotten in a fist fight or they've said things that really hurt the other person, like it feels like there's like an extra ante in there that you feel like you need to step in before they end up in a really awful situation. And so there's like this extra level of stress there of, is it safe for me to let them figure this out on their own? Or are we going to end up in this terrible situation that we've had in the past? Do you have any advice for that?
Yeah. I mean, especially with like, I would say aggression, that happens often, sometimes with kids with ADHD, just because that like their impulsivity can like happen so quickly. But like, I mean, I think it is still good to like try and not jump in because there are times where they will be able to regulate themselves. But also like one of the best prevention strategies is praise actually. And so it's like when you see like the siblings fighting or starting to like get a little bit escalated, but they're remaining calm, you can give that a lot of positive attention and say like, oh, I love how even though you're frustrated, you're still trying to solve this problem together. That type of positive attention can help prevent some negatives from escalating. And because like as a parent, you're likely giving that situation attention, whether you want to or not, whether it's you're like jumping in immediately and you're saying like, no, stop doing that, like stop fighting over the toy. Or if you focus on the positives in that moment. So like switching your attention to the positives, which again can be difficult to do, can be helpful for preventing it from escalating even further.
Yeah. And I feel like I need to like throw in this like disclaimer of like, you know your kid best. And I'm sure everyone can think of times where like they've done something and it worked, and also times where they did something and then it just made their kid more mad. So, you know, you as the parent have the most knowledge about your kid. And there is like this balance of knowing like, yes, for some kids, if you ask them a question when they're really irritated, they're just going to get more mad. But not necessarily always. We've probably shared like 20 different ideas over the course of the podcast. All 20 are not going to work for your kids. So like you have the best decision making capability to be like, you know what, these 4 sound like good ideas for my kid. This one, that's not going to work. My kid's going to like hate that, whatever. Like you need to use your like mom filter on what's going to work. But also like, and maybe I'm just projecting my issue right now of like also being able to trust my kid that they're not always going to have that problem, and that when I don't give them the chance to solve their own issues, I'm literally taking away the ability for them to practice those skills. And then they can't get better at it because I took away the way that they could have practiced that. So also like, I have to use my own regulation to say like, it's okay for me to like see where this goes. It may go bad and I hopefully have a backup plan, but allowing them the space to work that out on their own is also really valuable because they can't get better if every time I jump in and take that opportunity of practice away from them. So
yeah, I know it is like a back and forth. And I do love what you brought up about how it's like we did share a lot of like tips and they're not going to work for everyone. But I think this also goes back to what we were talking about earlier about like the 100% consistency, where it's like you also like, yes, don't expect yourself to be 100% consistent with skills. And also with that, don't expect your child to be 100% consistent with how they respond, you know? So
yeah,
there are times where something you do, it may work really well. Other times it may not do anything or it may even backfire. That doesn't mean throw the whole skill out or stop doing it completely. Just take a look at it as like it's one tool in your bag. And like maybe what you'll start to see is like, oh, this works really well in this situation, but it doesn't work so well in this other situation. It's really about finding those strategies that work for your family in specific situations. And it's so individualized because there's so many different things that come up for different families. Like, so I think it's important to acknowledge that with your consistency, also like give your child the grace of that consistency too.
And I think when you work with someone like you and you have a chance to like work through all those one-off situations, like those are the times where you can come up with the plans for different things. Cause like, you're right. People like something that works for your kid at home, and then you have an audience and you're out in public, all of a sudden it may not work in that situation, but to know you have someone like you on your side to be like, hey, let's look at those patterns. Let's find the places where like, okay, this situation worked well here. What's the pattern? Okay. Now we found out that like, okay, but when this happened, like when this relative's around, we're going to have to do something different. And that's why having someone in your corner is so helpful, because that person can help you look at things objectively, find those patterns and think about like, okay, well, you probably have like 753 strategies that you could pull from. And when you're in this situation, you're like, I remember 0 of my strategy options. Like that's how, when having an expert in your corner is like, okay, I can see that like these things work for your kid here. These things worked for your kid in this situation. These things didn't go so well. And you know, like, okay, well, I have my Rolodex of skills and I could be like, okay, well, if this worked and this worked, but this didn't, like probably this one will also help. Let's definitely not do that. Like, that's why having an expert there is so helpful, because when you're in the weeds, it's really hard to figure out what is going to be best for your family because it's stressful. Like you want your kid to do well.
Yeah, you do. And I mean, I think every single parent that we work with is like very well intentioned, but it's like they're just at a loss for what to do. Or you feel like you're doing the kitchen sink method where it's like you throw everything in and really cannot figure out what works. So yeah, it's like having someone who can take a step back, see things more objectively than you can in the moment is so helpful. And I think it builds your confidence as a parent a lot, where it's like, I have the strategies, I can do this now that you've got the support that you needed.
Okay. I'm like, I could talk about this all day because this is one of my favorite topics, but let me start to wrap us up. Okay. So lightning round. All you have to do is answer the question. You don't have to explain anything. If you need to think about it for a second, you can think about it for a second. It's totally fine. Okay. Number 1, what is the best thing that you've read or listened to recently?
A Psychology Today article by someone, I'll have to send you the link, and it is about perfectionism and ADHD, and how perfectionism and ADHD, it's called like back end perfectionism, where it's like everything needs to be perfect in order for me to complete the task, versus I need my work to be perfect in order to complete the task. It's about I need the context and the environment to be perfect in order to complete the task. Thought it was an amazing way to think about perfectionism and ADHD, and it resonates with a lot of clients I work with.
Okay, no, definitely. I'll say, yep, definitely want the link. Okay. Number 2, my most boring about me fact is.
I would say that I've lived in 4 states and 2 countries, but then I'm going to say an interesting one is that Bill Murray told me that I'm very nice, and I used to work at a bakery, and he bought a lot of bread for me and told me that I was very nice, and so that was a fun fact.
Okay, number 3, when I'm having a rough day, my go-to quote, song, poem, book, activity, whatever is
watching the trashiest reality TV ever.
Number 4, don't tell anyone
Oh my goodness, these are so fun. Don't tell anyone that I have about 5,000 emails I need to go through right now that I have not answered. It's so bad.
I'm pretty sure we all identify with that one. Okay. Number 5, if I had a magic fairy wand for one spell, I would
be able to teleport wherever I could, whenever I wanted to, so I would not have to drive anymore or fly anymore.
Number 6, the best piece of advice for mamas with ADHD is
to offer yourself self-compassion, which means first acknowledging that what you're going through is difficult and knowing that there are other people out there who are going through it too. So instead of being critical of yourself, just offering yourself self-compassion.
Now, the moms are like, oh my goodness, Dr. Carrie's my girl. I want to work with her. How can they work with you? Where do they find you? What's the deal?
Yeah, so I would say there's a couple different ways that you can find me or work with me. I am on Instagram, TikTok as Dr. Jackson. Just changed my handle. But I am also, so I'm located in the San Diego, California area, and I have a private practice out here. And so I'm able to see parents, kids, do evaluations for ADHD too. But I also have some other resources for people who live outside of California, like for teens as well too. I have a teen course that's actually coming out in February, which will be a lot of fun. And I have a lot of free guides. So I will give you the link to that, but it's all located on my social media, of course, which is the best way to find me and all of my tips.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for walking through this with us. I mean, emotional regulation is always going to be an area we can use some work on, both for ourselves and for our kids. So I just thank you so much for coming here and sharing your wisdom. And I hope you have an awesome day. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
For more resources, classes, and community, head over to my website, motherhoodinadhd.com.